A husband pushing to end life support after 3 days sounds so decisive until you notice the doctor hesitation, the paperwork stallation, and one question nobody in that room seems to answer.
"Prepare the withdrawal forms," my husband said flatly. "She's gone. Keeping her alive like this is pointless." Panic exploded inside me. I could hear every word, every footstep, every beep from the monitor beside my bed. But my body wouldn't move. My eyes barely opened. My throat wouldn't make a sound. I was trapped inside myself, while Corvin stood beside my hospital bed, deciding whether I lived or died. The doctor stayed quiet for a second too long. That's when I realized this wasn't the first conversation they'd had about ending my life support. I was fully conscious. 3 days earlier, I'd collapsed in our kitchen after drinking the wine Corvin handed me. Now he was speaking for me, signing papers for me, telling everyone what I would have wanted. But then the doctor glanced at my chart again, and his expression changed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. "I'd like another neurological assessment before we proceed," the doctor said carefully. Corvin's tone sharpened instantly. "You already ran those tests." "Yes," the doctor replied, "but there are inconsistencies." The room fell quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor beside me. I tried to force my fingers to move. Nothing happened. Corvin exhaled slowly, like a man trying very hard to stay patient. "Doctor, with respect, my wife has been unresponsive for 3 days. You said yourself the damage was severe." Damage. The word landed hard, because until that moment, nobody had actually explained to me what they thought happened. I remembered drinking the wine. I remembered feeling dizzy faster than I should have. Then the kitchen floor rushing toward me. After that, nothing. Now strangers were discussing my condition while I lay trapped inside my own body, listening to my husband argue for ending my life. The doctor flipped through papers attached to my chart. Her toxicology report doesn't fully align with the medication found in her system. Corvin answered too quickly. "She was under stress. Elodie mixed prescriptions sometimes." That was a lie. I'd spent years organizing every medication down to labeled containers because Corvin constantly forgot his own schedule. He knew that. A nurse standing near the doorway looked up briefly when he said it, just for a second, but I noticed. Corvin moved closer to my bed and lowered his voice into something softer, more performative. "She hated hospitals," he said. "She always told me she'd never want to live attached to machines." Another lie. We'd never had that conversation. The doctor didn't answer immediately. I could hear paper turning again, then a pen tapping once against the clipboard. Corvin must have noticed the hesitation too, because his voice became tighter. "Is there a problem?" The doctor looked toward the monitor beside me, then toward me, and for the first time since I woke up, someone in that room sounded uncertain. "There's one detail about your wife's condition," he said slowly, "that you haven't been informed about yet." Corvin stopped moving, and somehow, I knew he was suddenly afraid too. Corvin stopped writing the signature halfway through. The scratching of his pen against the clipboard cut off so suddenly that even the nurse near the door looked up. "What detail?" he asked. The doctor didn't answer immediately. He stepped toward the foot of my bed instead, studying the monitor beside me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "I'd prefer to review a few things first," he said. Corvin gave a short, restrained laugh. "Review what? You already told me her condition was irreversible." The doctor's tone stayed even. "I said severe, not irreversible." That single correction changed the entire room. I couldn't move, but I felt the shift instantly. 3 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. Back then, Corvin controlled every conversation effortlessly. At parties, in meetings, even around my family. He had this calm, polished way of speaking that made people assume he knew more than everyone else, including me. When we got married, he insisted on handling our finances because he was better with numbers. At first, it sounded practical, responsible even. But over time, I stopped seeing statements unless I specifically asked for them. Transfers happened without explanation. Investment accounts moved between banks I didn't recognize. Then 6 weeks ago, I found the withdrawals from my inheritance account. Large ones. Corvin claimed they were tied to a business expansion, but the company attached to the transactions barely existed online. No employees, no office, nothing. And when I confronted him about it, he smiled too quickly before changing the subject. Now, standing beside my hospital bed, that same smile was gone.
"Doctor," he said carefully, "if there's confusion about paperwork, I can clarify anything you need." The nurse near the doorway exchanged a glance with the doctor, small, brief, but deliberate. Then Corvin's phone vibrated. He stepped into the hallway to answer it, lowering his voice. But the door hadn't closed completely, and I heard him say, "If she wakes up, everything falls apart." My blood ran cold. A second later, hurried footsteps approached from down the corridor. Then another voice said quietly, "Doctor, we found a discrepancy in the toxicology report." The room went completely silent. The room stayed silent long enough for Corvin to realize he'd lost control of it. He walked back inside immediately, slipping his phone into his pocket. "What discrepancy?" The younger doctor near the doorway hesitated before handing over a file. "There are sedative levels in her bloodstream that don't match the prescription history provided during intake." Corvin frowned with practiced confusion. "That's impossible." No one answered him right away. I focused on every sound in the room because it was all I had. Paper shifting, shoes against tile, the slowing rhythm of Corvin's breathing. He recovered quickly. "Elodie's been under pressure for months," he said. "She had insomnia, anxiety. She mixed medications sometimes without telling people." Again, another lie delivered smoothly. The attending doctor finally looked at him directly. According to her pharmacy records, she was extremely consistent with dosage compliance. Corvin folded his arms. "So now we're questioning a woman in a coma?" The doctor didn't react to the jab. "We're questioning conflicting medical information." That sentence landed harder than Corvin expected, because for the first time, the conversation wasn't centered around my condition anymore. It was centered around what caused it. I heard Corvin pacing once across the room before stopping near my bed again. "We're wasting time," he said quietly. "Her prognosis hasn't changed." But the pressure in his voice had changed, and suddenly, other details started connecting in my mind.
When someone pushes so hard to explain a toxicology report, it raises different questions. Why does he need the overdose story to be believed so quickly?
Before I lost consciousness, Corvin had already been acting strangely, taking calls outside, locking his office door, asking odd questions about my will after my aunt's inheritance finally transferred into my account. Then yesterday, or maybe earlier today, I'd heard him discussing funeral arrangements in the hallway. Too early, too organized, as if he'd already planned the outcome. I forced every ounce of concentration into moving my hand. Nothing. Corvin leaned closer until I could smell his cologne. "You should have left things alone," he whispered. Then he stepped back just as the attending doctor spoke again. "Prepare a responsiveness evaluation." The nurse looked surprised. "You think she can hear us?" The doctor didn't take his eyes off me when he answered. "I think we may have underestimated her condition." For the first time since waking up, I realized Corvin was no longer controlling the room.
2 nurses repositioned equipment beside my bed, while the attending doctor explained the responsiveness evaluation in a calm, clinical tone. Corvin stood near the window with his jaw tight, watching every movement like he was calculating something. "Mrs. Mercer," the doctor said clearly, "if you can hear me, try to respond." I pushed everything I had toward my right hand. Nothing. The heart monitor quickened slightly anyway. One of the nurses looked up. "There," she said quietly. Corvin immediately stepped forward. "That's involuntary." "Maybe," the doctor replied, but he didn't sound convinced. Another test followed. Light against my eyes, verbal prompts, requests to blink. My body still felt buried under concrete, but somewhere beneath the paralysis, tiny reactions were beginning to fight through. And Corvin saw it too. "You're giving false hope," he snapped. "You already said the neurological damage was extensive." The doctor finally looked directly at him. "I also said we need more answers before making permanent decisions." Permanent. The word hit differently now, because suddenly, Corvin wasn't discussing my death like a grieving husband anymore. He sounded like a man running out of time. Then the memory came back fully. Not the collapse, the argument before it. I'd confronted him in his office after discovering the fake companies tied to my missing inheritance funds. Corvin denied everything at first, calm, smiling, but I kept pushing. And while he talked, I activated the voice recorder on my phone. I remembered exactly where I hid the backup afterward. A cloud upload connected to an automated release setting. If I failed to check in within 72 hours, the files would send automatically to my sister and attorney. My pulse spiked against the monitor, because by now, that timer had almost certainly expired.
A sudden burst of footsteps interrupted the room. A nurse hurried inside, holding a tablet, her face drained of color. She leaned close to the doctor and whispered something urgently. The doctor's entire expression changed. Slowly, he turned toward Corvin. Then he said, very calmly, "Mr. Mercer, you need to remain here. Hospital security is on the way." Corvin stared at the doctor for a full second without speaking. Then he laughed once under his breath. "Security? For what?" The nurse holding the tablet looked shaken. The attending doctor took it from her carefully, eyes never leaving Corvin. "We received a scheduled file transfer from your wife's personal account," he said. "It included audio recordings, financial documents, and a message instructing that the material be released if she became medically incapacitated." The room seemed to compress around us. Corvin's face didn't collapse immediately. He tried to hold on to control. "What kind of recordings?" The doctor tapped the screen once, and then I heard Corvin's own voice coming through the tablet speakers, clear, undeniable. "You changed the will without telling me?" The recording crackled slightly. I remembered the moment perfectly now. His office door closed, my phone hidden beside my purse. Then my own voice answered. "Because you've been stealing from me." Silence followed on the recording. Then Corvin again, colder this time. "You should have stopped looking into things, Elodie." Another sound. A wine glass setting onto a counter. My heartbeat monitor accelerated sharply beside the bed. The doctor paused the recording before the next part played, but judging from the expression on his face, he'd already heard enough. One of the nurses quietly stepped backward toward the doorway, just as 2 hospital security officers appeared outside the room. Corvin looked around quickly, recalculating. "This proves nothing," he said. "She was paranoid." The doctor's tone stayed level. "The files also included transfer records connected to shell corporations under investigation for fraud."
Corvin said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Every strange detail finally aligned at once. The rushed paperwork, the pressure to end life support, the fake concern, the overdose narrative, the missing inheritance money. He hadn't been preparing for grief. He'd been preparing for exposure. Then the doctor stepped closer to my bedside again. "Elodie," he said firmly, "if you can hear me, blink twice." I focused harder than I ever had in my life. One blink. Pain shot through my face. Then another. The nurse gasped softly. Everything changed instantly. People moved around the room at once. Someone adjusted medication. Another nurse called for neurology. The doctor leaned closer, checking my response again while the monitor climbed steadily beside me. And for the first time since waking up, I wasn't invisible anymore. Corvin looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. Not because I survived, because I heard him. Security officers approached him carefully. One asked him to step into the hallway. Corvin resisted for half a second before realizing every person in the room was now looking at him differently. Not like a husband, like a suspect. Weeks later, I learned the sedatives in my system had caused temporary neurological suppression that mimicked catastrophic brain injury. Without the second review, the hospital might have accepted Corvin's version of events completely. The investigation moved quickly after that. Insurance fraud investigators reopened financial records tied to his businesses. Detectives recovered deleted messages from his phone. My sister handed over the rest of the files I'd scheduled for release, and the final recording removed any doubt at all. Corvin was charged with attempted murder, fraud, and financial crimes before I was even transferred into rehabilitation. Recovery took months. Learning to walk again was easier than accepting how calmly he'd stood beside my bed, planning my death, while believing I couldn't hear him. I never looked at him the same way again. But the power he thought he had disappeared the moment the truth surfaced. The last time I saw Corvin, he was sitting behind reinforced glass waiting for arraignment while detectives reviewed evidence outside the room. And all I could think was this. The most terrifying part wasn't hearing my husband decide whether I should die. It was realizing how certain he'd been that nobody would ever question him.
The uncertain part is how many people mistake calm behavior for honesty, especially when decisions are made so fast enough that nobody thinks to question who benefits more from them.